Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this general election roundtable. I think many people here are from the department, but for those of you that aren't, let me give a quick plug for the 3PO cluster. The 3 does not have anything to do with Richard III. It instead stands for Parties, Participation and Public Opinion. So this is a research cluster within the Department of Politics and IR. And so I'm going to present to you a number of people who are going to talk from the cluster about the general election. I should also add that we have a hashtag for this, of course, you can see it up there. So various of us, I think, are going to be tweeting on this from the departmental feed and from elsewhere. There's a seat up here if you want, and some chairs at the back if you want to take those. So let me introduce the panel and the format. So there are 7 of us that are going to speak. We're going to take 5 minutes each, and that's going to be applied fairly strictly. So I'm going to speak, first of all, I'm Richard Whittaker, I'm the chair of this cluster, and I'm going to speak, first of all, about the results very broadly. Then I'm going to hand over to Philip Litch, who will talk about the Conservatives and UKIP, at least as much as can be done in the space of 5 minutes. Then Meryl Kelly is going to talk about 3 things, I believe: Labour, Scotland, and women in the election. And then we'll hand over to Shane Martin, who is currently over here. He's going to move over here at the appropriate time. He's going to talk about losses for small parties in coalitions and reflect a little bit on the Liberal Democrats. Then Stephen Hopkins over here will talk about how the election went in the case of Northern Ireland, and a bit about legitimacy as well, if I have that right.
Less about Northern Ireland, more about legitimacy.
More about legitimacy, okay. And then Lewis Romero, who's over here, is going to talk about the election in a comparative context, particularly in the context of the financial crisis that's hit Europe since 2008 and elections that have happened since then, with some focus on the centre-left and a little bit on UKIP as well. And then Tara McCormack on the end here is going to talk about various elements of this from a kind of foreign policy point of view. She's going to talk about the counter-extremism bill, foreign policy, and the EU, again, to the extent that this is possible within a 5-minute time period. I think there's a couple of seats further forward for people who've just arrived. Okay, I should also say that the question and answer bit of this is going to be off the record. So we're being filmed for the first part of this, but not for the later part. Okay, I'm starting my timer now. So let me talk a bit about this election from the point of view of the results. It is, of course, a remarkable election in that all the forecasting models and the polls were telling us that we would have a hung parliament, and yet we have ended up with a single-party majority, a 12-seat majority for the Conservatives. This raises questions which I'm not going to try and answer now about why the opinion polls got this wrong and why the statistical forecasting models as well were wrong on this particular thing, but I'm not going to try and answer that question at the moment. I want to start by saying a little bit about gains and losses for the parties, but without treading on the toes of others who are going to speak after me. So how did the Conservatives manage to win this? Well, in mechanical terms, they made gross gains of 35 seats, a net gain of 24. And most of these came at the expense of the Liberal Democrats. Many of those gains from the Liberal Democrats were in the southwest of England, where the Lib Dems had previously been, of course, very strong. And the Conservatives made one gain from UKIP with Mark Reckless, who defected from the Conservative Party over to UKIP. Labour also gained at the expense of the Liberal Democrats. They took 12 seats from the Lib Dems, particularly in London and the northwest, and also dotted around other parts of the country. And Labour took 10 seats from the Conservatives. But this was, of course, hugely outweighed by the fact that they lost 8 seats to the Conservatives, and they lost this huge amount of 40 seats to the SNP in Scotland. So the Liberal Democrats then are left with only 8 MPs after this, and only 1 MEP as well after their almost total wipeout in the European elections last year. So the Lib Dems have 1 MEP in Scotland, 1 in Wales, and 6 in England. And all of their MPs from the southwest, which really was their stronghold, have gone in this election. UKIP are something that Phil's going to talk about more, but it's worth saying in basic terms that they quadrupled their share of the vote this time around. So they won about 3%, a little under 1 million votes in 2010. They won over 12%, well over 12% this time around, with just under 4 million votes. And also they were the biggest losers in terms of the electoral system. And so you can see that on this graph, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment. They won, of course, more votes and fewer seats than the Liberal Democrats by some way. They managed 120 second places compared to only 1 second place in 2010. And it's also worth mentioning briefly, I think, that they made net gains in the council elections, which haven't been talked about that much, but of 176 councillors, and they also took control of their first council in Thanet. Interestingly, of course, Farage didn't win the seat there, but UKIP did take the council. The Greens also did badly out of the electoral system, whereas the SNP did very well. So they got 50% of the vote in Scotland and 95% of the seats in Scotland. In Wales, Labour won 37% of the vote and 25 of the 40 seats, which was a net loss of 1 seat for Labour over there. But the disproportionality of the electoral system hasn't actually gone up. It's pretty much stayed the same. So this is the dotted line you can see on the graph here using the Gallagher index of disproportionality, which ranges from 0, where there's no disproportionality, up to 100, where there's total disproportionality in terms of converting votes into seats. So this hasn't really moved, and the two-party share of the vote actually went up slightly because, of course, the Conservatives and Labour both made small gains in terms of their proportion of the vote. So the arguments for electoral reform are still present, but they're not quite as bolstered as they might have been after this election, particularly because the first-past-the-post system here has delivered a single-party majority, which very, very few people were expecting beforehand. And the last thing I want to mention then briefly is turnout. This also didn't change very much. It went up by about 1 point to 66.1% on the data we have at the moment. So at least we can't argue that turnout's going down. It is going up, and it has been going up since a low point of 2001, but only very slowly, and it's still nowhere near where it was previously. So some small change in that, but we will have to wait for better data and more information to get an analysis of how far this worked. Theories of turnout explain what went on at constituency level with regard to the closeness of the vote and all that sort of stuff. Okay, but I'm going to come to a stop there.